Just as the curtain's about to fall on 2018, we have yet another budget smartphone from Asus in for review. The new ZenFone Max M2 slots in just above the ZenFone Max M1 but overlaps the ZenFone Max Pro M1 a little bit. That's quite surprising, especially because Asus says the older models aren't going away anytime soon. There's also relatively fresh competition from Xiaomi, Honor and Realme in the market right now, so buyers are not short of choices. We're about to sort through all the clutter to see what Asus has brought to the table this time. Similar to the ZenFone Max Pro M2 which launched alongside it, the new ZenFone Max M2 is a fairly large phone with a notched screen. If you look at these two phones head-on, the only difference is that the ZenFone Max M2 has a slightly wider notch with the earpiece in the center rather than integrated into the frame above it, as on the higher-end model. A status LED is hidden within the earpiece, and discovering it was a pleasant surprise. At 6.26 inches diagonally with relatively narrow borders all around, this screen does have a strong visual impact that helps make this phone seem impressive. However, it doesn't have reinforced Corning Gorilla Glass 6 like its more expensive Pro counterpart. This isn't ideal but is understandable given the price. Asus has managed to offer a relatively powerful processor at a new low price. This time is the Qualcomm Snapdragon 632, which isn't even all that old. We've only seen it on one phone before now, the Honor 8C. Thankfully, there are two nano SIM slots and a dedicated microSD slot in the SIM tray, which is always nice to see. 4G and VoLTE are supported on both SIMs. With a starting price of 9,999 rupees for the variant with 3GB of RAM and 32GB of storage, Asus is undercutting Honor by a significant margin, and this is the variant we're reviewing. You can also get the ZenFone Max M2 with 4GB of RAM and 64GB of storage for 11,999 rupees. Buyers also get 100GB of Google Drive space for a year. The ZenFone Max M2 comes running Android 8.1 and the company has promised an Android 9 update in January 2019, which isn't too far off. Asus adds its own useful calculator, voice recorder and FM radio apps along with a few other third-party apps that can be uninstalled. The stock Android UI was consistently smooth throughout our review period, and light 3D games such as Giant Boulder of Death didn't give us any trouble either. Asphalt 9 Legends ran well at low quality settings. It was perfectly smooth but the visuals weren't too sharp, which is fine considering the price of this phone. It got only slightly warm after playing games for about 15 minutes. In terms of everyday usability, one curious issue was that the status icon seemed to get cut off by the notch. Asus might need to tweak its software to properly recognize the notch's width. Full-screen games and video apps also mask the notch by default, and there's no way for apps to extend into the space at its sides. Of course, this might change with future software updates. The ZenFone Max M2 has a generous 4000 mAh battery, which is a bit of a surprise considering its relatively low weight. Qualcomm Quick Charge isn't supported, but you do get a 10-watt charger in the box, which isn't too slow. Battery life was superb, and this was one area in which the ZenFone Max M1 really shines. Our day of testing involved quite a lot of video streaming and a few hours spent experimenting with apps and games. We managed to get through a full day starting at about 9 AM and ending in the late evening with about 30% still left in the tank. Our HD video loop test ran for a solid 13 hours 34 minutes, which is more than what the ZenFone Max M1 managed, but also less than competing phones such as the Realme 2, Honor 8C and Redmi 6 Pro. The 13-megapixel primary rear camera features electronic stabilization. It's accompanied by a 2-megapixel depth sensor and a single LED flash. The front camera has an 8-megapixel sensor and f2.0 aperture. Taking photos was the only thing that felt laggy because it often took a while for this phone to lock focus and save shots. It even displayed a processing message on screen while we were waiting. Daytime shots were surprisingly well detailed, but colors were a bit muted. You have to get close to your subject for the best results, but even landscapes will look decent enough if you don't zoom in all the way. Shots taken using the depth effect mode didn't look natural at all. Object edges weren't well defined and the background blurring was harsh. At night, we really struggled to get usable shots. Despite its much touted f1.8 aperture, this camera did not pick up a lot of detail and many of our shots came out blurry or just murky. There were times when photos seemed fine on screen right as we were taking them because the viewfinder freezes on stills as they're framed. However, tapping over to the gallery showed that these very same shots were actually quite blurry because we had moved too soon thinking they had been saved. It took a while to realize this and adjust our behavior accordingly. Video recording goes up to 4K with the rear camera, but we'd suggest that users disregard this setting. 1080p footage wasn't bad at all though, and there was minimal focus hunting with moving objects. At night, video was as poor as stills, and our shots came out looking very dark and blurry. The front camera is fairly decent, and users should be happy with the quality of selfies they can take for social media. Asus does say that planned future updates will bring EIS and the depth effect mode to the front camera, which is good to know. We also have to mention that Asus is still struggling with the UI of its camera app. We first pointed out these issues with the ZenFone Max Pro M1, and many of them still persist. For example, it takes 3 taps to begin recording a video, and the UI isn't very well organized. The Asus ZenFone Max M2 seems like a competent entry-level device. It has enough power to make sure that budget buyers don't have to struggle with a compromised usage experience. You can enjoy games and videos on the big screen, and you won't feel constrained when running most everyday apps. Battery life is definitely good, but this phone stumbles where many budget models do with its cameras. It might also be a bit too physically large for some buyers' liking. The ZenFone Max M2 is a big step up from the ZenFone Max M1 and fills a small but strategically significant price gap. It certainly won't stand out for its camera quality, but it's good enough for the general standard of this market segment. Thanks for watching. That was our review of the new Asus ZenFone Max M2. For more reviews and videos like this, do visit us at gadgets360.com.